close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath. Tonight, we drift into a story of quiet love, gentle hearts, and timeless elegance. Welcome to Sense and Sensibility. The air was unusually soft for early spring, somewhere between the frostbitten whispers of March and the dewy hum of April. The town of Rosewillow found itself in bloom. The sidewalks were laced with tiny petals fallen from cherry blossom trees, and front porches carried the scent of clean linen and morning coffee. On the edge of the sleepy town stood an old two-story farmhouse with white shutters and a wraparound porch, a place where stories lived longer than people, where even the wind knew how to speak gently, and the evenings arrived like whispered promises. Inside the house lived Elinor Bell, a young woman of 29, with quiet eyes and the kind of strength that rarely needed announcing. Her days were spent restoring her late grandmother's garden, baking soft scones, and keeping a bookstore open that rarely turned profit, but always brought in kindness. The house had once belonged to Miss Alma Bell, Elinor's grandmother, a woman of old-fashioned grace and handwritten letters. After Alma's passing 2 years ago, Elinor returned to Rosewillow from Charleston, trading city sirens for crickets and headlights for fireflies. Elinor never meant to stay long, but then again, the heart rarely makes plans, it only listens. This morning, Elinor stepped onto the back porch with her second cup of chamomile tea. The porch overlooked a garden long forgotten, its stone paths now shyly peeking through wild lavender and overgrown rosemary bushes. Still, it breathed with potential. She wore a soft cardigan over a faded sundress and tied her chestnut hair in a low knot. Her bare feet pressed into the warm wooden boards as she leaned against the railing, listening to the wind brush against the wind chimes soft. Silver notes that seemed to match the rhythm of her thoughts. She glanced down at the small, moss-covered bench beneath the wisteria vines. The bench had once held stories. Her grandmother used to read there. Her grandfather had proposed there. Elinor herself had kissed someone there once at age 16, but today, it held something else. A letter, folded neatly and tucked under a smooth river stone. She blinked. There had been no wind strong enough to blow it there, no mailman who delivered to the backyard, no neighbor bold enough to sneak into her garden without a good reason. Curious, Elinor descended the steps quietly, as if not to startle the morning itself. Her fingers brushed the letter's edge, lifting it from under the stone. The envelope was cream-colored and unsealed, with her name written in soft blue ink. Elinor? Nothing else. No return address, no stamp, no explanation. With a puzzled breath, she slid her finger under the flap and opened the letter. The paper was thick, textured, and smelled faintly of cedar wood. The handwriting was elegant and precise, like someone who still believed in penmanship and long pauses. Dear Elinor, there are things that live in silence, like old love, like regrets, like hope. Sometimes we forget them until a garden wakes them up again. I know this is unexpected, but I believe this letter was meant to find you. Return tomorrow, same place. I'll write again. A friend, she stared at it and then read it again. And again, her heartbeat didn't quicken. It softened. Not from fear, but from the quiet thrill of mystery. She looked around, half expecting someone to appear behind a bush or peek from beyond the picket fence. But the garden was empty. Still, only the wind moved. She folded the letter, gently as if it were glass, and held it to her chest. That evening, Elinor sat at her grandmother's old writing desk in the sunroom. The sky outside was streaked with rose and gold, and the cicadas had just begun their soft song. She lit a single beeswax candle and opened her worn leather journal. She hadn't written in weeks, but tonight, something inside her stirred. April 3rd. I received a letter today from no one. It was beautiful, strange, gentle. I'm not afraid. I'm expectant. Like the first page of a book you didn't know you needed. She looked toward the window. The garden swayed under the moonlight. Wisteria dancing like purple ribbon, Elinor smiled. Tomorrow, she'd return to the bench. The next morning, Elinor woke early. Not because of the alarm, but because of anticipation. Like a child before Christmas, She brewed her tea and wore a soft white dress that used to belong to her mother. She brushed her hair out, letting it fall freely around her shoulders, and placed a lavender sprig behind one ear without really thinking why. By 7:32 a.m., she stood barefoot again on the back porch, holding her breath, and there it was, another letter, exactly where the first had been. This time, the envelope simply said, "To the soul who listens." She smiled to herself, shaking her head slightly half amusement. Half wondered. She took the letter, opened it, and read, "Elinor, you are not forgotten. No, you never were. There's something about this garden, something that holds time, something that listens. Years ago, I left behind more than just footprints here. I left behind a feeling, one I thought had vanished. But seeing you again, even from a distance, it's reminded me that some things don't die. Would you believe that kindness can be passed down like seeds? That one glance, one hello, one shared laugh can bloom for years. I saw you smile last week at the grocer when the clerk dropped his coins. You helped him. You didn't even think twice. That's why I wrote, 'Meet me Friday.' It's the bench. If you wish." Still a friend. Eleanor's cheeks flushed. She couldn't recall anyone watching her at the store. And yet, it had happened exactly as described. Something inside her shifted, not like a grand realization, but like warm tea filling a cold cup. The rest of the day moved slowly, wrapped in a soft sort of wonder. Elinor cleaned the bookstore shelves twice. She forgot to charge a woman for a novel, and the customer gently reminded her. She spent an extra 15 minutes arranging a poetry displayingly to tear it down because it didn't feel right. Her heart was distracted. Asterisk at home that night, she made her grandmother's favorite soup potato leek with too much time. She played an old record on the turntable and danced barefoot in the kitchen. Her cardigan sleeves pushed up, hair messy and glowing. She was alone, but somehow, not lonely. Friday arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle. Elinor almost laughed at the cliché of it mystery meetings in the rain. Still, she dressed. A green shawl. An umbrella with tulips printed on it. She made hot cocoa and poured it into a thermos. At 10 a.m., she walked to the garden bench and waited. Raindrops tapped gently against the umbrella. The garden smelled richer, now like damp soil and moss and the breath of spring. Minutes passed. No footsteps, no voices. But there was something on the bench beside her. A third letter. "Elinor, you came. That says more than words ever could. Asterisk, forgive me. I cannot meet you today. Not yet. This is not about games. It's about courage and time, not rushing what matters. Asterisk, you once wrote poetry in the school newspaper. Probably thought no one remembered, but I did. Asterisk, your words had gentleness, like a leaf falling without breaking. I kept one, about the sky breathing with us. I'm not far, I'm just healing and watching and hoping. I will write again. But next time, I want you to write too. Write me a letter. Leave it beneath the bench. Tell me about the moment you last felt truly seen. Until then." Yours in the garden. Elinor didn't move for a while. The rain had stopped. The world held. Still, the wind chime above her porch sang softly in the distance. A dove cooed on a nearby fence. The garden swayed in rhythm. For the first time in a long while, Elinor felt awake. Not the kind of awake that came from caffeine or obligation, but the kind that stirred something deep, something forgotten. She pressed the letter to her lips and whispered, "Whoever you are, thank you." Not in any dramatic, magical way, but in the kind of subtle shift one senses only when there's still enough to notice it. Elinor stood beneath the wisteria vines the next morning, her hand resting lightly on the back of the mossy bench, the third letter still tucked safely in the pocket of her cardigan. The air was fresh with the scent of wet earth after last night's She hadn't slept much the night before, rain, and for a moment, not because of anxiety, it felt like the world was exhaling, but because her thoughts kept spinning
Asterisk.
with quiet wonder. She'd read the letter 4 times. Each time it grew warmer, like tea steeped just a bit longer. Whoever this person was, they knew her or at least, had been watching her life in small but meaningful ways. They'd remembered the poem she once published in her high school newsletter nearly 12 years ago. A tiny poem about the sky breathing alongside us. She'd written it during a time when her world was too loud, her future too blurry, and poetry had felt like the only way to shape her thoughts into something beautiful. To think someone had kept that poem all these years, it sent a slow ache into her chest. Today, she'd come with a folded piece of paper in her bag, wrote her letter. She hadn't written one in years. Not like this. Not by hand. Not for someone whose name she didn't know, whose face she couldn't picture. And yet it had flowed out of her, like a river finding its path again after years of drought. She waited until the early sun warmed the bench, then carefully removed her letter and placed it beneath the same smooth river stone that had held the others. As she stood up, she paused. For a moment, her fingers lingering on the stone, as if the connection between her and this invisible writer was somehow real, tangible, live beneath her hand. And then she whispered softly, "I hope you find it." The day passed slowly. At the bookstore, Elinor shelved new arrivals and rearranged the poetry section 3 times. She tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting. She remembered how the letters had described her small kindness at the grocery store, how it made her feel seen in a way she didn't know she needed. It wasn't often that someone noticed the tiny acts of care we give without thinking, but this stranger, this friend, had seen them. It made her feel real. By evening, she was curled in the sunroom again, rain tapping gently against the windows. Her candle flickered on the windowsill, casting long shadows across her grandmother's lace curtains. She wrapped herself in a wool blanket, journal in her lap, and began to write again. April 6th today, I left a letter for someone I've never met, and yet I feel like I know him, or her, or them. They remember things about me that I've forgotten. They see kindness in me I don't always see myself. I didn't write to impress them. I wrote to answer. The question was, when did I last feel truly seen? The answer came slowly, but when it came, it felt like breathing after holding your breath. Too long, I think it was last autumn. I was helping an old woman across the street downtown. Clutched my arm so tightly I could feel her trembling. And when we reached the other side, she looked up and said, "You remind me of someone I once loved." She smiled, then walked away. I never saw her again. But in that moment, I felt it, that someone saw beyond my shape, beyond my function, beyond my errands and groceries and schedule. She saw my presence, my soul. I think this letter writer is doing the same. The next few days followed a strange rhythm. Elinor kept to her usual routine bookstore in the mornings, tea and gardening. In the afternoons, but always with a sense of expectancy. She found herself humming more often. She wore her grandmother's earrings again. She picked fresh flowers for the kitchen window, something she hadn't done in months. Then, on Thursday morning, she returned to the garden bench. Another letter awaited her. This time, it was folded into a blue envelope. A small detail, but it felt significant, like a shift in tone, a new chapter. The handwriting remained the same, elegant, curved, assured. Her name was on the front, but this time it was written with a tiny heart under the R. Elinor sat on the bench and opened it carefully. "Dear Elinor, thank you for writing. I read your words 3 times, once fast, once slow, and once aloud. Each time, they filled something I didn't know was empty. That story about the woman on the street, I felt it, and I believe her. I believe you carry echoes of people we've all loved once. I've debated for days whether I should sign my name this time, whether I should stop hiding behind letters and meet you face to face. But something inside me keeps whispering, not yet. You asked for the last time I felt seen. It was in this garden. 12 years ago, I had just turned 20, heartbroken over someone who had no idea how deeply they had bruised me. I came here to this very bench thinking I'd sit and cry quietly. But instead, a girl barely 17 walked past me. She didn't say a word, but she smiled. Not out of politeness. Not because she had to, but because she saw me. Really saw me. It reminded me that I hadn't disappeared. That girl, I believe it was you. I don't expect you to remember. But I remember the feeling. This garden remembers too, if you're willing. I'll leave a small clue next time. Something closer to the truth. Ever your friend Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her 17-year-old self had wandered through this garden many times, especially after school when she needed quiet. She'd always believed the space held something timeless. She had no memory of seeing anyone in pain, no memory of a stranger crying. But she did remember how she used to smile at people, how she believed then that sometimes a smile could be enough, and maybe, for this person, it had been. Later that evening, Elinor sat by the window and tried to picture who this letter writer could be. Someone who knew her from the past. Someone who had seen her smile as a teenager. Someone who had kept that moment tucked away for years. Could it have been someone from high school? A neighbor? A friend of her brother's? Her mind wandered. 2 old memories, homecoming dances, dusty library corners, springtime concerts at the town square, but none of them quite fit. And somehow, it didn't matter. The mystery was no longer about identity. It was about connection and trust, and slow, careful unfolding. On Saturday, Elinor returned to the bench again. She arrived earlier than usual, her hand slightly shaking as she lifted the next letter. This one came with a pressed daisy tucked inside Gillo and small, but perfectly preserved. The letter read, "Elinor, I think I'm ready. Asterisk, but first I want to ask you something. Something important. Asterisk, what do you believe love feels like when it's real?" Write back. Tell me. Not with poetry, not with quotes. Just your truth. If your answer feels like something I can meet, I will. Elinor didn't write her answer that day. She thought about it for a long time, through Sunday and into Monday. She carried the question with her like a secret inside her coat pocket. What does love feel like when it's real? She asked herself on her walk to the grocery store, while folding laundry, while kneading bread, while lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. By Tuesday evening, she picked up her pen. Dear friend, I've thought about your question endlessly. What does love feel like when it's real? I think it feels ... quiet, but not. It's empty. It feels like finding your favorite song playing unexpectedly in the background of someone else's playlist. It feels like someone saving the last peach for you, not because you asked, but because they remembered you like peaches. It's not about grand gestures or sweeping romance. Not really. It's about knowing someone sees the version of you that isn't curated or planned, and loves that version most. It's about presence, not performance. I think real love is less like lightning, more like sunlight, warm, constant, life-giving. That's the kind of love you're asking about, ... Then yes, I believe in it, and maybe I believe it could be waiting here. Elinor folded the letter gently, tied it with a ribbon, slipped it beneath the bench the next morning, heart steady, hands calm. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long, long while, she hoped the morning was unusually golden. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains like liquid honey, casting soft patterns on the wooden floors of the sunroom. Elinor awoke not with an alarm or the rustling of trees, but with a curious flutter in her chest, something between anticipation and peace. It had been 5 days since she left her last letter beneath the bench, answering the stranger's question about what love, real love, feels like. In the days since, she had not received a reply, but the silence hadn't frightened her. In a strange way, comforted her, as if the quiet itself was a kind of knowing, a space between breaths, a pause before a turning page. She spent the morning moving slowly. Her body followed familiar rhythms, making tea, tending to the garden, brushing soil from her grandmother's gardening gloves, which she had taken to wearing now. But her mind drifted constantly toward the bench, toward the words she had written, toward the person who might be reading them now, wherever they were. There was no mail today, no note hidden under the stone. And yet, something felt different, as if the stillness was holding its breath. Asterisk. By early afternoon, Elinor found herself sitting in the bookstore, a little bell above the door jingling occasionally as customers came and went. She restocked the romance shelf with old favorites and newly donated titles, her fingers brushing, Over familiar spines, Jane Austen, Brontë. Wolf, there was comfort in their presence, like distant friends always ready to remind her that stories, real, aching, beautiful stories could live forever in pages and people alike. Around 4. Just as she was closing the shop, an envelope slipped through the crack beneath the front door. She noticed it as she was turning the sign to closed, the cream-colored corner peeking against the darker floor tile. Her breath caught. She bent down, picked it up, and felt the familiar thickness of the paper. Her name was written across. The front again, Elinor, with a small sun drawn next to it. No longer hearts, sun. A symbol of clarity. She walked to the back room before opening it, needing a quiet space to be alone with whatever was inside. The bookstore's back room was filled with soft chairs, a dusty lamp, and a patchwork quilt Elinor's mother had sewn. Years ago, she sank into the armchair, placed the letter gently in her lap, and opened it. Elinor, it began. Your words felt like home. I read your letter in the garden at dawn, and though the sky was still dark, your truth lit something. In me, I thought, had gone out. I know now, without hesitation, that we've met before, but not just in a garden glance years ago. We've been walking past each other in this town for years. It's people with stories curled up tightly inside them, waiting for someone who'd ask the right questions. You asked. You answered. You wrote with courage. And now, I will too. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page. I said I'd give you a clue, something closer to the truth. So here it is. I've been coming to your bookstore once. A week for the last 2 months? You helped me find a novel for my niece 3 weeks ago? I wore a navy scarf and smelled like coffee. You probably didn't notice. It's okay. You don't need to know who I am today. Not yet. I don't want this to be about memory. I want it to be about presence, about who we are now. Elinor paused. Her heart skipped gently in her chest. She remembered the man with the navy scarf. He had smiled softly, spoken with warmth. He had lingered for just a moment too long after she handed him the book, as if waiting for something else, or perhaps trying to find the courage to say it. But then he had left, and she hadn't thought. Much of it until now, the letter continued. If you're willing, I'd like to meet you. Not with mystery or shadows, not with notes. Just you and me in the garden? Sunday morning, I'll be there at 8. If you come, we'll begin. If not, I'll understand. No more letters, just this one. Elinor closed her eyes, letting the words sink into her skin like sunlight. Letter rested against her chest for a long time. When she finally stood, her decision had already bloomed inside her. Not rushed, not nervous, just sure. Sunday morning came softly. Birds called gently from the trees, and the breeze was cool enough to need a shawl. Elinor dressed simply in ivory blouse, soft jeans, and her mother's locket. She didn't do much to her hair. Letting it fall naturally seemed honest. She brought no letter this time, no paper, no pen, just herself. The garden was quiet when she arrived. The bench sat under the wisteria, waiting as it always had. She stood at the top of the steps for a moment, the rising sun warming her face, and then she descended slowly, her heart as steady as her breath. He was already there. He stood with his back to her. Facing the garden, his hands gently clasped behind him. Tall, in a light blue shirt, dark slacks, and brown shoes caked slightly with morning dew. His hair was darker than she remembered, slightly tousled, and as he turned, she saw the warm smile she had glimpsed before, the one from the bookstore. 4. A long moment neither of them spoke. They simply looked, and in that glance the mystery fell away, not as a disappointment, but as a relief. This was not a man shrouded in shadows. He was real, familiar, present. Hello, Elinor, he said, his voice quiet. Carrying the same calm as his letters, she smiled. Hello, she replied. So, ... it was you. He chuckled softly, a hand running through his hair. It's been me, for a while. She took a step closer, the grass cool beneath her flats. You didn't want me to know. I wanted you to feel something before I told you who I was. I didn't want my face to interfere with your heart. Elinor studied him for a moment, then motioned to the bench. Shall we sit? They did, slowly, side by side. Not too close, not far. Just enough to feel the garden around them. The silence was not awkward. It was full, like the first page of a new chapter written in soft pencil. He looked down for a moment before speaking again. "I'm Henry," she smiled. "Henry, I remember now. You used to come in for history books. You always paid in cash," he nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And you always had a quote written on the chalkboard in the corner. One week it was, 'Some people arrive and make such a beautiful impact on your life, you can barely remember what life was like without them.' I never forgot that." Her cheeks colored slightly. "I used to write those for myself. I never thought anyone really read them." "I did," he said. "Every single one." They sat there for what felt like a long time, talking about everything and nothing. About gardens and books. About childhood dreams and the way the light changed in the afternoon. Henry told her about his work as a graphic designer, how he'd moved back to Rosewillow to care for his father after a stroke, how he stayed even after his father passed, unsure of where to go next. Elinor shared stories about her grandmother, about city life, and what it had taken to let it go. About the loneliness she hadn't known how to name until someone wrote her a letter in blue ink as the sun climbed higher. Their shadows softened. They laughed dizzily. Their silences felt full. And when Henry finally stood to leave, he didn't. "Rush, I'd like to see you again," he said, eyes steady. "You already have," she replied, her smile warm and teasing. He laughed. "I mean without the letters." Then asked me properly, he did. "Elinor Bell, would you meet me for tea next Saturday? At the place of your choosing?" She held out her hand. "It's a date, Henry." As he walked away, Elinor remained on the bench for a little while longer. She looked up at the sky, the very sky she had once written poetry about, and breathed. In deeply, there were no more letters beneath the stone now, only footprints in the dew, like the echo of two voices finding their way to each other. And something told her this was just the beginning. Saturday arrived like a breath, soft and steady. The world seemed to slow, as though holding its breath in anticipation. Elinor had chosen the small cafe tucked behind the bookstore a place, where sunlight danced through ivy-covered windows and the scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. It was quiet, cozy, and intimate. The perfect space for a conversation that felt like it had been years in the making. She arrived early, not out of nervousness, but out of a sense of calm. There was something about Henry that made her feel steady. He had been present in the garden, steady in his letters, and now his presence seemed to fill the air with a quiet certainty. She had prepared herself for many things in life, unexpected adventures, difficult conversations, the weight of loneliness. But this kind of meeting, this kind of connection, was something she had never known how to prepare for. She set up the table by the window, letting the morning light fill the small space with golden warmth. The table was simpler, single white ceramic teapot, 2 mismatched cups, and a plate of scones, still warm from the oven. She smiled as she stirred her tea, the soft clink of the spoon in the cup adding to the peaceful atmosphere. She had taken to reading the same book over the past few days. Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, of course, she'd always loved. The way Austen's words blended the tension between rational thought and heartfelt emotion, between restraint and passion. Elinor had found herself thinking of her own life in those terms. Rational, orderly, comfortable. And yet there was something just out of reach, something daring, something wild, that she was only now beginning to let in. The soft jingling of the doorbell broke her thoughts. She turned to see him enter. Henry, dressed in a soft gray sweater, dark jeans, and a look of quiet purpose. He stood for a moment just inside the door, scanning the room. Their eyes met, and a small smile played at the corners of his lips. He was here as he walked toward her. Elinor noticed how the dim light seemed to catch the edges of his features, his strong jawline, the way his eyes softened when he smiled. There was a calmness about him, a steadiness, as if he had always known exactly where he was meant to be. And for a moment, Elinor felt as if everything in her life, every choice, every moment, every misstep had led to this very moment. A moment that now felt undeniably right. "Hello, Elinor," he said, his voice warm, a quiet invitation. "I'm glad you chose this place. It has the feeling of familiarity." She stood, a smile curling up on her lips. "It's my favorite. The tea here is the best in town." "I can tell," he replied, lowering himself into the chair across from her. "There's something about it that feels ... comfortable, simple, in a good way." Elinor poured him a cup of tea, the soft steam rising between them like an unspoken bridge. "I've been thinking about your last letter," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "Out what you said that we've been walking past each other in town for years. Feels strange to hear that, but somehow it makes sense." Henry nodded slowly, lifting his cup to his lips. "It's strange, isn't it? How we can live in the same place, move through the same spaces, and yet never truly see each other. There's a kind of distance that isn't measured by miles, but by something else." Elinor's gaze softened as she listened. She could feel the weight of his words, how they resonated not just with the idea of their past, but with the shared truth of being human. She took a sip of her own tea, her fingers curling gently around the warm cup. "I know what you mean," she said. "I've lived in this town for years, and yet there are parts of it that still feel like strangers to me, like the people I pass in the street or the places I visit every day, and still something feels like it's missing." Henry's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the quiet between them felt like something deeper, something unsaid, but known. "I think that's what I've been looking for," he said quietly. "The missing part. The piece of myself I've been passing by without realizing it. Maybe ... maybe that's why I've been writing, because I didn't know how else to say it." Elinor's heart skipped a beat at his words. There was an honesty in his voice that resonated deeply within her. She could see it in the way he looked at her, not with expectation, but with something gentler, something more real. It was as though he, too, had been searching for something, for someone, to help fill that gap. "I think I've been looking for it, too," she said softly. "I didn't even know I was until you started writing, until you made me start thinking about what really matters, what I'm really looking for." They both sat in the quiet, their words floating between them like a gentle current, moving in and out, shifting and settling. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, of the kind of truth that only comes from truly seeing someone. Finally, Henry spoke again, breaking the stillness. "Elinor, I have to be honest with you. I don't know where this is going. I don't know what happens next. But I know I want to find out. I want to take this slow, and to really get to know each other, not through letters or glimpses in the garden, but face to face." Elinor's heart swelled at his words. There was something about Henry's honesty, his willingness to step into the unknown with her, that felt like a promise of something beautiful, something worth discovering. She smiled, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "I'd like that too. I'd like to see where this goes. Slowly, together." For the rest of the afternoon, they talked. Just about themselves, but about their lives. About Rose Willow, about their childhoods, about dreams and regrets, about the things they'd lost and the things they were finding again. The conversation never felt forced, never felt like an interview. It was easy, flowing naturally, like two rivers finding each other at last. As the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow through the cafe windows, Elinor realized that something had shifted, something deep and quiet and real. It wasn't love yet, not in the grand, dramatic sense, but it was something hopeful, something alive. Henry stood, pulling on his jacket. "I should go," he said, his voice warm. "But I'd like to see you again, Elinor, soon." Elinor nodded, standing as well. "I'd like that too." They walked to the door together, and as he opened it, the cool evening air greeted them both. There was no grand goodbye, no sweeping gesture, just a simple moment of connection, of knowing that even in the smallest ways, something had changed between them. "Good night, Elinor," Henry said, his eyes soft. "Good night, Henry," she replied, smiling up at him. "I'll see you soon." As he walked away, Elinor stood. For a moment, watching him disappear down the street, a small smile curled on her lips as she turned back to the cafe. There was a quiet kind of joy in her chest. Not the kind of joy that shouted or danced, it was quieter, like the first light of dawn or the soft flutter of a bird's wings. But it was there, steady and warm. She was no longer waiting for something to happen. It was happening now, and maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what she had been searching for all along. The week that followed was the kind of week that felt both long and short. A time had bent to accommodate the new space that Henry had quietly stepped into within Elinor's life. The mornings came with a soft excitement, an undercurrent of anticipation that hummed quietly in the background of every routine, every task. She found herself smiling at nothing sometimes, her thoughts drifting to the next time she'd see him. It wasn't an overwhelming thought, but a quiet one, a soft constant. Like the ticking of a clock you can't help but listen to as the seconds pass. Elinor had never been the type to rush into things. She'd always been cautious, calculated, and deliberate. But with Henry, there was a natural ease, a sense that time could stretch without pressure. It wasn't like those movies where love was an explosion, a dramatic rush of emotions and grand declarations. It was steadier, like a river carving its way through stone, gentle but undeniable. She spent Saturday morning organizing the bookstore. It was always a quiet, solitary task that she found oddly comforting. Shelves lined with books, some well-loved, others just waiting for their reader, had a way of grounding her. She was lost in thought, rearranging the new arrivals, when the doorbell chimed softly. She glanced up, expecting the usual stream of customers, but instead found Henry standing in the doorway, warm smile on his face. "Good morning, Elinor," he greeted, his voice carrying a soft richness that made her heart skip. He was dressed casually, his navy blue jacket and jeans adding to the comfortable feel of the morning. "Good morning," she replied, her voice matching the warmth in his. "What brings you here today?" Rhys stepped further into the bookstore, his eyes scanning the rows of books. "I thought I'd pick out something new. Maybe something you'd recommend." Elinor raised an eyebrow playfully. "Something I'd recommend, huh? Are you sure you're ready for that?" He smiled, that familiar twinkle in his eyes. "I'm always ready for a good recommendation. You've already proven your taste with the tea place. I'm trusting you with my literary life now." Elinor couldn't help but laugh. Felt so effortless with him, so easy. She led him to a section near the back of the shop, filled with novels of all kinds, classics, contemporary, a bit of poetry here and there. "Let's see," she said, scanning the shelves. "I think I have just the thing." As she reached for a novel, their hands brushed together. It was a fleeting moment, but the electricity was undeniable. Elinor paused for a heartbeat, looking up at Henry. He was looking at her too. His gaze was steady, and there was something in the way he looked at her now that made her feel more seen than she had ever felt before. "I think you'll enjoy this," she said softly, handing him a book by one of her favorite authors. It's a story about two people who've lost their way but find each other at the right time. Henry took the book with a smile, his fingers grazing hers once more. "I'm starting to think that's exactly what we're doing. Finding each other at just the right time." Her heart gave a quiet flutter at his words. There was something in his tone, something sincere, that made her feel as though they were already more than what they had been a few weeks ago. She didn't have the words to explain it, but the connection was deepening, layer by layer, and she couldn't ignore the way it made her feel. They spent the next hour together talking about books, their favorite authors, their lives, and the small, quiet things that made them who they were. It was comfortable, like they had known each other forever, but also new, as if every word exchanged was another thread being woven into something larger, something significant. It was as if they were building a world, one shared thought at a time. As the clock ticked on, Henry glanced at his watch. "I should go," he said reluctantly, though he didn't seem eager to leave. "But would you like to join me for lunch later? I know a quiet little cafe just down the street." Elinor hesitated for only a moment, her heart stirring at the idea of spending more time with him. She had always prided herself on being independent, not needing anyone to fill the gaps in her life. But something about Henry made the gaps feel smaller, like the pieces of herself that had been quietly missing for years were slowly falling into place. "I'd love to," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'll meet you there at noon?" "Perfect," Henry replied with a grin. "I'll see you then." As he left, Elinor stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him disappear down the street. There was a soft feeling in her chest, a kind of joy that wasn't over the top, but just enough to make her feel like she was exactly where she needed to be. It was subtle. It was quiet, but it was real. The cafe was small, tucked in between two buildings on a side street Elinor hadn't visited in years. She'd always passed it by on her way to other places, never thinking to stop. But today, it felt like the perfect choice, a new place for a new beginning. She arrived at exactly noon, the sun high in the sky and the air warm with the promise of spring. Henry was already there, sitting at a small table by the window. He looked up as she entered, and his face lit up with that familiar smile, the kind that made her feel like everything was going to be okay. She waved and made her way to the table, her heart fluttering just a little faster with every step. "Hi," she said, sitting down across from him. "Hi," he replied, his voice softer now, almost as if the word itself held more weight then. Just a greeting. They both sat for a moment in quiet comfort, the soft murmur of conversation from the other patrons in the cafe creating a peaceful background. A waiter came over and took their order, a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches. Nothing fancy, but everything felt special. Every moment felt special. So, Henry began, breaking the silence. "I've been thinking about everything, about us." Elinor took a sip of her water, her gaze meeting his. "What have you been thinking?" He leaned back slightly, his eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking that we've been moving through life separately for so long, and yet, ... we were meant to meet. It's strange, don't you think? How life can bring you together with someone when you least expect it?" Elinor smiled softly. "It is strange, but I don't think it's a coincidence. I think we were meant to find each other too. I think ... I think we're both ready for this." Eyes softened. "Ready for what?" "For this," she said quietly, her voice full of quiet certainty. "For whatever comes next." He smiled at her, his gaze warm and full of understanding. "I think you're right." Sat in that comfortable silence again, the kind that spoke volumes without needing to be filled with words. Everything about this moment felt like it had been building slowly, like the first steps of something new, something exciting but also steady, grounded. As their lunch arrived, they continued to talk, the conversation flowing easily, effortlessly. There were no grand declarations, no overwhelming promises, just a people getting to know each other slowly, with a kind of tenderness that made every word feel important. By the time they finished their meal, the cafe had grown quieter, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement outside. Elinor felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't just the comfort of the conversation or the connection with Henry, it was the feeling that something had changed. Something had shifted inside her. She was no longer looking for answers or waiting for something to happen. She was living it. As they stood to leave, Henry placed his hand gently on hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The touch was simple, but it carried a quiet promise. "I'll see you soon." "Elinor," Henry said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "I'll be waiting," she replied, her smile warm and sure. As they parted ways, Elinor walked back to the bookstore, her heart full and light. She knew this was just the beginning. There would be more moments, more letters, more days spent together. But for now, this quiet, steady connection was enough. And maybe, just maybe, it was everything Elinor woke early the next morning, her body full of energy, despite the late hour at which she'd fallen asleep. The night before had been quiet, the kind of evening that wrapped you up like a blanket, offering comfort and rest without any demands. The tea they had shared at the bookstore cafe had stayed with her long after they said goodbye. There was a peacefulness about the way Henry spoke, the way he listened to her, as if their conversations were a delicate dance, gentle, steady, without any rush. It was Saturday morning now, and the garden was calling to her. The wisteria vines had bloomed fully, and the scent of lavender and rosemary filled the air with a kind of sweet promise. She had promised Henry that they would meet in the garden again. She wasn't sure why this place felt so important, but something told her it held more than just memories. It was a place where new things could begin. After a quick breakfast, Elinor put on her favorite light cardigan, grabbed her basket for flowers, and walked out the door, stepping onto the familiar porch. The morning was cool, and the light mist that had risen with the dawn still clung to the earth like a soft veil. It was a day that felt like a secret, like the world was keeping a little something hidden just for them. As she walked toward the garden, she couldn't help but think about the conversation they'd had at the cafe yesterday. Henry had been so open, so genuine, and it had made her feel like there was space between them, space for both of them to grow. She hadn't felt this way in a long time, like she was no longer just waiting for something to happen, but living. In the moment, enjoying the small steps that led to something new. The garden was still. The bench was waiting for her, sitting silently beneath the wisteria. The petals of the flowers scattered on the ground like confetti. She smiled softly, thinking of how they had first met here. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been a few weeks. She settled on the bench, her fingers running lightly over the stone beneath the old tree. A soft breeze swept through the branches, and the world seemed to pause for just a moment. Elinor felt the quiet weight of the past week fall away, replaced with something new, a gentle thrill of anticipation. It wasn't about big gestures or grand promises. It was the steady, simple truth of spending time with someone who saw you, truly saw you, without needing anything more. Just as she was about to close her eyes and breathe in the sweet air, she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart gave a soft leap, and she turned to find Henry walking toward her, his smile wide and easy. He looked comfortable in his brown jacket and jeans, his hands tucked casually in his pockets as he made his way toward her. "Good morning, Elinor," he said, his voice warm and full of ease. "Good morning," she replied, her heart lifting, just slightly at the sound of his voice. "I was wondering when you'd arrive. I couldn't resist the call of the garden," he said with a smile. "I have to admit, I've been thinking about it ever since our last conversation." Elinor raised an eyebrow playfully. "And what exactly have you been thinking?" "About," he sat down beside her, his expression serious for just a moment. "About how easy it feels to be with you. About how comfortable it is to just ... be. I've never really experienced that before. Not in the way I've been experiencing it with you." Elinor's breath caught for a moment. There was something so raw and honest about his words, something that made her feel like he was speaking from a place deeper than just the surface. It wasn't just the charm of the moment, it was real. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "I've been feeling the same way. It's like I didn't know how much I needed this, how much I needed to let go of the past and just ... breathe." Henry smiled, his eyes softening as he looked at her, and maybe that's what we've both been doing. Breathing together. The quiet between them felt full, not empty. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't laden with expectations. It was simply a moment of shared understanding of two people who had found something special and were not afraid to let it unfold slowly. Gently, after a few moments, Henry spoke again. "I know you said the garden was important to you. I think it's important to me too." Elinor looked at him curiously. "In what way?" "I've been thinking about why it feels like I've known you longer than I really have. And I think it's because this place, this garden, it holds something for both of us. It's where we first spoke, where we first shared a moment. And somehow it feels like we've both been waiting for something like this. Not just with the letters, but with life, with love." Elinor's heart skipped a beat, the truth of his words sinking in. "I think I know what you mean. I didn't expect any of this, but it feels like we were both waiting for the right moment to really see each other." Reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I think this is the right moment." Elinor looked down at their hands, the quiet weight of his hand in hers, steadying her. She could feel her breath catch in her chest. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a quiet promise. Something simple. But it was enough. She didn't need grand words or gestures. She didn't need anything more than this simple, beautiful moment. "Maybe we've been waiting for each other," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we've been waiting for a long time, and we didn't even know it." "I think so," Henry said, his voice low and warm. "But we're here now, and I think that's what matters." Elinor smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "I think you're right." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The garden was silent, save for the soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze. It was as though the world was holding its breath for just a little while longer, letting the two of them sit in this quiet space, letting everything unfold in its own time. Finally, Henry stood and gently tugged on her hand. "Come with me," he said, his voice filled with a quiet excitement. Elinor stood as well, following him as he led her through the garden. He walked with purpose, a glint in his eye that made her wonder what he had in store. They reached a small, secluded corner of the garden where a hidden path curved away from the main walk. It was lined with ivy-covered trellises, and the air was thick with the fragrance of jasmine. At the end of the path stood a small stone fountain, its water sparkling. In the morning light, Henry turned to her, his eyes soft with something that looked like anticipation. "I've been working on this," said his voice tinged with excitement. "I thought you'd like to see it." Elinor stepped closer, her heart fluttering. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice full of awe. "What is it?" Henry smiled. "It's a place. A place where we can make memories, where we can just be together." She turned to him, her eyes meeting his in that quiet, steady way they had begun to do so often. "I think I've been waiting for this place," she said softly. "For us."
Henry
stepped closer, his hand gently resting against her cheek. "Then it's yours, as much as it's mine. This garden, this moment, this life we're building, it's all ours, Elinor. And I wouldn't want it with anyone else." Elinor closed, her eyes leaning into his touch. There was no need for grand declarations, no need for anything more than the truth of the moment, than the simple feeling of being here, now, together. She had found her place, she had found him, and that was enough. The days that followed the quiet moment in the garden felt like the gentle unfurling of a story that had always been there, waiting to be told. Elinor had never known love could feel like this steady, quiet, without rush or expectation. Every glance from Henry, every word shared, seemed to plant a seed in the soil of her heart. And as the days grew longer, that seed took root, growing. Stronger with each passing moment, it wasn't always big gestures or grand declarations that made their connection feel real. It was the quiet moments, the shared smiles over cups of tea, the laughter that bubbled up between them without any reason, unspoken understanding that lingered between them like the softest of silences. It was in the way Henry's presence filled the empty spaces of her life, not with noise, but with calm. She had seen him in many ways over the past few weeks, as the man who had watched her from the edge of the garden, as the stranger who had written her letters, and as the friend who had walked beside her through the familiar streets of Rose Willow. But now, as she sat beside him in the garden again, her heart swelling with something deeper, she realized that she had never truly seen him before, not like this. The garden was their place. Every time they met there, it felt like the world fell away, like it was just the two of them, together, in this small pocket of time where everything was possible. The wisteria vines had begun to bloom again, their sweet scent hanging in the air like an invitation. The ground was soft beneath their feet, and the fountain's water glimmered in the late afternoon light, creating a melody of gentle sounds. Elinor sat next to Henry on the stone bench, her fingers lightly brushing against his. They hadn't said much in the last few moments, but the silence between them felt natural. She wasn't sure what to say. Words seemed unnecessary when his presence spoke volumes. And still, she couldn't help but feel that there was more she wanted to know more about him, about them, about the kind of love they were building together. "Henry," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of a question she hadn't quite known how to ask. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met? If I'd kept my distance? Or if you hadn't written those letters?" Henry turned to her, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled, a soft knowing smile that made her heart skip. I've wondered, and I think we would have both kept moving through our lives, waiting for something, not realizing that we already had what we were searching for. He paused, his fingers curling gently around hers. We found each other, Elinor. Tat, 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 tat. That's what matters. Elinor looked at him, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in her chest. She had spent so many years searching for meaning, for a sense of belonging, for something that could fill the spaces inside her that had always felt a little too empty. But now, sitting here with Henry, she realized that the search had always been about finding him, the person who understood her, who saw her not just as a collection of past mistakes and future uncertainties, but as someone worth knowing, someone worth loving. I think I've been waiting for you, she whispered, her words barely audible, but full of sincerity. Henry's eyes softened. I think I've been waiting for you too. They sat together for a while, their hands intertwined, the world around them fading into the background as they shared this moment of quiet understanding. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden, but neither of them moved. It felt like time had slowed down, as if the universe itself had decided to give them this gift, this space to be fully present, to simply be. Eventually, Elinor turned to him, her heart full of something she couldn't quite name. Henry, do you think we could build something here, in this garden? Something that lasts? Henry looked at her, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. I think we already have, he said softly. Every moment we've spent here together, every letter, every conversation, it's all part of what we're building. It doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be real. Elinor smiled, feeling something shift inside her, as if a door had opened to a future she hadn't dared to imagine before. A future with him, real. Yes, I think that's the key. I don't want anything else but that. Henry leaned forward, his forehead gently touching hers. Then we'll make it real, Elinor. Every day, in the quiet moments, in the shared looks, in the small, everyday things that matter more than anything else. The words settled between them like a quiet promise, and Elinor closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of the garden. She could hear the rustling of the leaves, the distant sound of birdsong, and the soft lapping of the fountain's water. This was what she had been waiting for. It's not the whirlwind romances or the dramatic gestures, not the noise or the rush. Just the steady, quiet presence of someone who understood her, someone who made her feel whole. They spent the rest of the evening in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. They discussed their favorite books, their childhood memories, and the small joys that made life beautiful. It was simple, it was effortless, and it was everything they both needed. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Henry stood and offered Elinor his hand. She took it, her fingers slipping easily into his, and they walked slowly toward the house, their hearts light and full of hope. The air was cool now, the night settling in around them, but Elinor felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a warmth that came from knowing she wasn't alone anymore. They stood at the door of the house, and Henry turned to face her. Elinor, he said softly, his voice filled with something tender, something she hadn't heard before. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that whatever it is, I want to face it with you. Elinor smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. I feel the same way, Henry. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The connection between them was undeniable, and in that silence, it felt as if they were both saying everything they needed to say. Henry leaned in, his lips brushing softly against her forehead in a gentle kiss. I'll see you tomorrow, Elinor, he whispered. She nodded, her eyes closing for a moment. Savoring the feeling of being with him. I'll be waiting, she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Elinor glanced down at the small notebook she kept in her pocket. It was full of sketches, scribbled thoughts, and dreams, small pieces of her that she had never dared to write down before. She had started to write in it every morning, capturing Moments of clarity, of peace, of hope. This morning she had written, "I've found the roots of my life buried deep in this garden," in Henry's words. "In the quiet moments we share, and I think I've found the path forward." The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts, and she looked up to find Henry standing at the entrance of the garden, a soft smile on his lips. He was holding a small bouquet of daisies, the stems wrapped in twine. The sight of him standing there felt like a quiet reassurance. "Morning," he said, his voice soft but filled with warmth. "Good morning," Elinor replied, her heart lifting at the sight of him. She gestured to the bench beside her. "Come, sit with me." Henry walked over and sat down beside her, the daisies gently placed on her lap. He didn't say anything at first, just looked around at the garden, his eyes taking in the beauty of the morning. It was one of the things Elinor had come to appreciate about him, the way he could just be, without needing to fill the silence with words. It made her feel safe, like nothing had to be rushed, like everything was exactly as it was meant to. "B, these are for you," he said, nodding toward the daisies. "I thought they'd go well with the roses." Elinor smiled softly, taking the flowers in her hands. The simplicity of the gesture of him bringing her flowers just because touched her in a way she hadn't expected. She held the daisies to her nose, breathing in their fresh scent. "They're beautiful, Henry. Thank you." He smiled, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to do something for you, something simple." Elinor placed the flowers on the bench beside her, her fingers still lingering on the soft petals. "It's perfect," she said quietly.
Owie.
"You always know how to make things feel perfect, Henry." He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was light, but it sent a wave of warmth through her. "Glad." "You think so?" he said, his voice low. "Because I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about where this is going." Elinor's heart fluttered at his words, but she didn't feel fear. She didn't feel the familiar rush of panic that came with uncertainty. Instead, she felt a calmness settle over her, a certainty that she hadn't known before. "And what? Do you think?" "I think," Henry said, his voice steady, "that we've been given something special, something real, and I want to build on that. I want to see where this goes, together." Elinor smiled, her heart full as she looked at him. "I want that too," she said softly. "I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." Henry reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "We'll face it together, Elinor, one day at a time, no matter what." They sat in the garden for a long while, just holding hands, letting the silence between them fill with everything they didn't need to say. The sun climbed higher, casting dappled shadows across the stone paths, and the world continued to move around them, but in that moment, it felt like time had stopped, like everything was just as it should be. Later that afternoon, Henry walked with Elinor through the town square, their steps in sync as they strolled side by side. The town was alive with the hum of everyday life, people shopping, children, playing the sound of the market vendors calling out their wares. It was a peaceful Saturday, the kind of day that made everything feel simple and clear. They stopped at the small cafe they had visited before, and as they sat down at a table by the window, Elinor couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment settle in her chest. There was no grand moment here, no sweeping declaration, but there was something real, something steady in the way Henry looked at her, in the way their hands brushed under the table as they talked about everything and nothing. "I've been thinking," Elinor said, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup, "about what you said earlier, about building something real." Henry looked at her, his eyes soft. "What have you been thinking?" She smiled, a quiet warmth spreading through her. I think we're already building it. One moment at a time, one letter, one conversation, one quiet afternoon in the garden. Henry reached across the table and took her hand in his. "I think you're right," he said softly. "I'm glad it's with you." Elinor's heart swelled at his words, and for a moment, she felt the weight of everything that had led her here, the doubts, fears, the years of waiting, and she realized that it had all been worth it, because now, with Henry by her side, she knew she wasn't just waiting anymore. she was living. She was building, and that was enough. As the afternoon wore on, sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cafe's windows. The world outside continued to move, but for Elinor and Henry, time seemed to slow, stretching out before them like a soft promise. The future was still a mystery, still a road they hadn't walked down yet. Ready? Ready for whatever came next? Elinor woke early the next morning, the light outside still soft and gray as the sun began to rise. The world seemed quiet in that moment, as if the day had not yet decided whether it would be busy or slow, filled with noise or peaceful stillness. She rose from bed and pulled on a light sweater, her bare feet padding softly on the wooden floor. She could already hear the birds outside, their song rising with the sun, filling the morning with their sweet, familiar melody. As she walked through the house, her gaze fell on the small notebook she had kept by her bedside. It was filled with her thoughts, her dreams, her reflections, everything she had felt in the past few months. It was her secret space, the place where she had written about the things that mattered most to her. She had written about Henry, about their first meeting, their shared letters, the quiet moments in the garden, and the way her heart had gradually opened to him in ways she had never expected. She had written about the love that had quietly grown between them, not in grand gestures, but in the steady, everyday moments that made them feel more real. It had been 6 months since that first letter, 6 months since they had met, since they had shared their first conversation under the wisteria in the garden. And in those 6 months, Elinor had learned something important. She had learned that love was not about waiting for the perfect moment, or the perfect person, or the perfect circumstances. It was about being with someone who accepted you for who you were, who was willing to build something real with you one moment at a time. It was about finding someone who saw the world in the same way you did, someone who didn't need grand gestures, but who could appreciate the quiet beauty of everyday life. Elinor walked into the kitchen, found that person, poured herself a cup of tea, the warmth of the mug in her hands grounding her in the moment. She gazed out the window at the garden, where the wisteria vines now bloomed in full force, their delicate purple, flowers hanging like jewels in the morning light. The garden had always been a place of peace for her, a place where she could sit and think, where she could escape the world and just be. But now, it was something more. It was a symbol of everything that had changed in her life. The garden was where she had first met Henry. It was where their love had grown, slowly and quietly, like the flowers and vines that bloomed there every year. She had come a long way since that first letter. She had come from a place of doubt, of loneliness, of waiting for something that she wasn't sure would ever come. But now she was here, with Henry, with someone who had not only seen her for who she truly was, but who had helped her see herself in a new light. She had learned that love wasn't something that just happened, it was something you built, day by day, with trust, with patience, and with a willingness to be vulnerable. As she stood at the window, her mind drifted to Henry, to their quiet moments together, to the way his presence filled the space around her with warmth and peace. They had talked about the future, about what it might look like, but Elinor had stopped worrying about it. She didn't need to know every detail of what would come. She knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming down the hall. Henry's voice called out softly from the doorway. "Elinor?" She turned to find him standing. There, a smile on his face, his eyes soft and full of warmth. "Good morning," he said, his voice as familiar and comforting as the morning itself. "Good morning," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. She set down her mug and walked toward him, feeling the steady pull of his presence as always. They had been through so much together, but every time they were together, it felt like a new beginning. Every day with him was a new opportunity to build something more, to continue growing together. "I thought we might take a walk, Henry," said, his smile widening. "It's a beautiful morning." Elinor nodded, her heart swelling with affection. "That sounds perfect." They walked through the house and out the back door into the garden, the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet, the only sound breaking the morning silence. As they walked side by side, Elinor felt the weight of the past 6 months settle gently around them. It wasn't a heavy weight, it was a weight that held them together, a weight that anchored them in the present moment. They walked in silence for a while, simply enjoying each other's company. The garden was beautiful in the soft morning light, the flowers blooming in brilliant colors, the air filled with the scent of fresh earth and blossoms. Henry reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers, and for a moment Elinor closed her eyes, allowing herself to simply be with him. To be in this moment, in this life they were building together. "I've been thinking," Henry said after a while, his voice soft but steady, "about us." Elinor turned to him, her heart quickening. "What kind of promise?" Henry stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I want to promise you that I'll be here. Not just now, but for all of it. It's for all of the moments, the quiet ones, the difficult ones, the ones we can't predict. I'll be here, Elinor, with you, through everything." Elinor's chest tightened, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never been one for grand declarations, but there was something about Henry's words that reached deep inside her. Something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, that made her believe every word he said. She smiled softly, her eyes misting over. "I promise the same," she said quietly. "I'll be here, Henry, with you, through everything." They stood there for a moment, their hands still intertwined, their hearts beating in quiet harmony. It wasn't a grand promise, it wasn't a dramatic vow, it was simply the truth, and it was enough. Later that day, they sat on the porch of the house, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden. They talked about their future, about what they wanted to build together. They talked about their dreams, their hopes, and the small, everyday moments that made life so beautiful. There was no rush. There was no need to have everything figured out. They had each other, and that was enough. Elinor had never imagined her life like this. She had never imagined that one day she would be sitting on a porch with someone who loved her, someone who made her feel like she was enough. But here she was, with Henry. And she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Henry leaned over and kissed her gently on the cheek. "I love you, Elinor," he whispered. Elinor smiled, her heart full. "I love you too, Henry." And as they sat together in the quiet of the night, Elinor realized that this was exactly what she had been searching for all along. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic moments, but the steady, quiet presence of someone who loved her for who she was. Someone who had seen her, truly seen her, and had decided that she was worth loving. Together, they had built something real, something lasting. And in that quiet, beautiful moment, Elinor knew that this love, this life, was exactly where she was meant to be.